In a forgotten corner of the city, a black restaurant owner served a plate of food to a street racer everyone feared. Minutes later, two police officers stormed in, ready to arrest him right there in her dining room. But when they threatened violence, she stood between them and defended the racer, forcing the officers out. That single choice made the entire neighborhood turn against her, but what happened the next day left everyone speechless. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from and what you think about standing up for what's right. The neon signs along Patterson Avenue had been flickering for months, casting unstable shadows across the cracked pavement. It was the kind of street that the city had given up on years ago, where broken streetlights stayed broken and potholes grew deeper with every rain. The sound of distant sirens was as common as breathing here, a soundtrack nobody paid attention to anymore. Graffiti covered most walls, layers upon layers of tags and territorial markings that told the story of a neighborhood fighting to exist. Inside Maya's kitchen, the only black-owned soul food restaurant for blocks, the fluorescent lights hummed steadily above empty tables. Maya Rodriguez stood behind the register, her dark brown eyes scanning the street through glass windows covered in years of grime. She wore her grandmother's old apron, faded blue with small burn marks near the hem, but clean, always clean. Her locks were pulled back into a thick bun, and her hands, calloused from years of work, rested on the counter like she was waiting for something that might never come. The morning ritual never changed. She unlocked the door at exactly 5:30, turned on the lights one by one, checked the pilot light on the old stove her grandmother had refused to replace, and started the first pot of coffee. The aroma filled the small space, mixing with the lingering smell of yesterday's cooking, spices and smoke and memory. She pressed the power button on the old radio. Static crackled before settling into a smooth jazz station. The music filled the silence, but couldn't quite fill the emptiness. Only 2 customers all morning. Again. She glanced at the calendar taped to the wall beside the kitchen entrance. 3 red circles marked the dates. Rent due in 7 days, insurance due in 10. Her brother's physical therapy appointment in 5. The numbers didn't add up. They hadn't added up in months. She pulled out the worn, leather-bound ledger her grandmother had used since 1987 and opened it to the current month. Red ink dominated the pages. Expenses exceeded income by nearly $2,000. And that was before accounting for the repairs the health inspector had mentioned last week. Maya walked to the window and looked out at Patterson Avenue. The auto body shop across the street had closed last year, its bay doors spray-painted with the words, "Thanks for nothing," in angry red letters. The corner store was now boarded up with plywood that someone had turned into an impromptu memorial, flowers and candles, and photos of young men who'd died too soon. Only the liquor store and the check-cashing place remained, their security gates pulled down even during business hours, sending a clear message that trust was a luxury this neighborhood couldn't afford. The restaurant had been her grandmother's dream. Rosa Rodriguez had opened it in 1987, back when Patterson Avenue was alive with families, laughter, and hope. Back when people knew each other's names and watched each other's children. Back when Friday nights meant the diner was packed with factory workers celebrating the end of the week, when Sunday mornings brought church crowds dressed in their finest, when the jukebox in the corner actually worked and played Motown hits until midnight. But Rosa passed 3 years ago, collapsing behind this very counter during the dinner rush. Her last words a whispered reminder to Maya that the secret to good gumbo was patience and love in equal measure. Maya had been running it alone ever since. Alone, and losing ground every single day. The regular customers had dwindled to a handful. The younger generation didn't come at all, preferring fast food chains or trendy spots downtown where they felt less judged, less watched, less reminded of struggles they were trying to escape. The older generation came less frequently, their fixed incomes stretched thin, their memories of Rosa fading like old photographs. She sat down at the corner booth, the one her grandmother always saved for family, and opened a worn notebook. Inside were columns of numbers, all written in careful handwriting. Expenses, bills, debts, medical costs. Her pen hovered over the page before writing down the words, "Call landlord. Ask for extension." Her hand shook slightly as she wrote. This was the third time in 6 months. She knew what he'd say, the same thing he said last time, and the time before that. "Business is business, Miss Rodriguez. I've got bills, too." Her younger brother, Marcus, had been shot 6 months ago. Wrong place, wrong time, caught in crossfire he had nothing to do with. He'd been walking home from his shift at the warehouse, texting Maya to ask if she'd saved him any cornbread, when 3 cars had pulled up at the intersection of Patterson and 5th. The gunfire lasted less than 30 seconds. 14 shots. One of them had found Marcus. The bullet had shattered his T12 vertebra, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. Now he was in a wheelchair, living in a rehabilitation center across town, relearning how to live, learning how to transfer from bed to chair, learning how to accept that walking might never happen again, learning how to swallow the anger that came with being 24 years old and dependent on others for everything. Maya had been the one to ride in the ambulance with him, holding his hand while he cried and asked her if he'd ever walk again. She'd lied and said yes, her voice steady even as her heart shattered. But the doctors had said maybe, and maybe cost money they didn't have. His insurance covered the initial surgery and 2 weeks of rehabilitation. Everything after that, the specialized physical therapy, the adaptive equipment, the psychological counseling he desperately needed, all of it required upfront payment, cash, no payment plans, no exceptions. The bill sitting in her purse right now was for $8,000. For 3 months of therapy that might, just might, give Marcus a chance at regaining some mobility. She'd called 17 different organizations, applied for 11 grants, and been denied by all of them. Too much income to qualify for assistance. Not enough income to actually pay for anything. The bell above the door chimed softly. Maya looked up, forcing a smile that felt heavy on her face. An older woman walked in, Mrs. Patterson, one of the few regulars left. She was in her 70s, always wore a church hat even on weekdays, and never ordered anything except black coffee and a side of grits. She nodded without speaking, took her usual seat by the window, and unfolded a newspaper so old the pages had yellowed. Maya brought over the coffee without asking, setting it down gently. Mrs. Patterson nodded again, still not speaking, eyes never leaving the paper. There used to be conversation. There used to be warmth. Maya remembered being a little girl, sitting in this very booth, listening to Mrs. Patterson tell stories about her late husband, about the war, about the March on Washington she'd attended in 1963. But those conversations had stopped years ago, replaced by this comfortable, sad silence. Maya went back behind the counter and stared at the framed photo taped beside the register. Her and her grandmother, both smiling, standing in front of the newly painted sign outside. Maya's Kitchen? Soul food with soul. It was taken on the day Maya officially took over. Back when hope still felt possible. Back when she believed that hard work and good food would be enough. She missed her grandmother every day, but especially on days like this, when the weight of it all pressed down so hard she could barely breathe. When the silence of the empty restaurant felt like judgment, when she wondered if she was disappointing the woman who'd sacrificed everything to build this place. Her grandmother had survived things Maya couldn't even imagine, had lived through segregation, had raised 4 children alone after her husband died in a factory accident, had built this business with her bare hands during a time when banks wouldn't loan money to black women and suppliers wouldn't deliver to black-owned establishments. "What would you do, Grandma?" Maya whispered to the photo. "How did you keep going when everything felt impossible?" The photo didn't answer, but Maya could almost hear her grandmother's voice anyway, that strong, steady tone that never wavered. "You get up, baby. You get up, and you show up, and you do the work. Not because it's easy, not because it's fair, but because our people have always done the work. That's how we survive. That's how we win." But still, she showed up. Still, she cooked every dish like it mattered. Still, she wiped down tables and swept floors like the president might walk through that door. Because her grandmother had taught her something important. You don't measure your worth by how full the room is. You measure it by how you show up when the room is empty. And Maya was still showing up, even when showing up felt like the hardest thing in the world. Another hour passed. No customers. She refilled the napkin dispensers just to keep her hands busy. She reorganized the condiment shelf, wiping down bottles of hot sauce and checking expiration dates. She watered the small plant on the windowsill, a resilient little fern her grandmother had planted decades ago that somehow kept growing despite the lack of light and attention. The radio played an old Aretha Franklin song, and Maya hummed along, letting the melody carry her somewhere far from the cracked tiles and unpaid bills. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong on Patterson Avenue. Low, deep, rumbling, like thunder rolling through concrete. She walked to the window and looked out, squinting against the midday sun. A car turned onto Patterson Avenue. Not just any car. A modified Nissan Skyline, midnight blue, with a custom body kit that sat so low to the ground it seemed to float rather than drive. The front bumper had been replaced with something aggressive, angular, designed for aerodynamics rather than aesthetics. The hood was carbon fiber, matte black, with a subtle bulge that suggested a modified engine underneath. The wheels were massive, wrapped in performance tires that looked too wide for the street, chrome rims catching the sunlight like mirrors. The engine roared as it slowed, a deep, throaty sound that echoed off the empty buildings, reverberating through the broken windows of abandoned storefronts. It wasn't the rattle of an old car struggling to survive. This was power, controlled and deliberate. The exhaust popped twice as the car pulled up to the curb right in front of Maya's kitchen, small flames briefly visible from the dual tips. Neon lights glowed beneath the chassis, casting purple and green reflections on the wet pavement, creating an otherworldly effect in the harsh daylight. Maya watched, frozen. She'd seen cars like this before, usually in news reports about illegal street races, about crashes on the highway, about young people dying in twisted metal. The media always showed the same footage: burning wreckage, crying mothers, police officers shaking their heads and talking about reckless youth with no regard for the law. The neighborhood association had held 3 meetings about street racing in the past year, each one filled with angry residents demanding action, demanding arrests, demanding that these young people be stopped before they killed someone. The driver's side door opened slowly, hydraulics hissing softly. A young man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, lean but muscular in the way that comes from physical work rather than gym memberships. He wore a black hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms covered in tattoos. Not the random, impulsive tattoos of youth, but carefully designed pieces. Gears and pistons interlocked in geometric patterns. Flames curling around what looked like a speedometer. Words in script she couldn't read from this distance. His skin was light brown, his hair buzzed short on the sides with slightly more length on top. He wore dark jeans, slightly torn at the knees, and scuffed sneakers that had once been white but were now gray with wear and road dust. Across the back of his hoodie, in bold silver letters that caught the light, were the words Apex Crew. Below it, in smaller text, First Across the Line. Maya's chest tightened. The Apex Crew. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the name. Street racers, illegal meets, high-speed chases through residential areas at 3 in the morning. The police had issued warnings. The news had run exposés. Just last month, a race on the east side had ended with a car flipping through a guardrail. The driver survived, but barely, and the community outcry had been immediate and loud. These weren't just reckless kids. They were dangerous criminals who needed to be locked up before someone got killed. But Maya had also heard other stories, whispered conversations. Marcus had mentioned them once, said that some of the Apex Crew members worked at the warehouse with him, said they were good people, hard workers, family-oriented, that the media only showed one side. She'd dismissed it at the time, too tired to argue, too focused on her own problems to care about the complexity of anyone else's story. The young man glanced around nervously before locking his car with a quick beep. The alarm chirped twice, and the lights flashed in response. He walked toward the restaurant slowly, hands deep in his pockets, shoulders tense like he expected someone to jump out at him, like he was used to being treated as a threat before he even opened his mouth. When he reached the door, he paused, looking through the glass. His eyes met Maya's. For a split second, she saw something she didn't expect. Not arrogance, not danger, fear. Plain, exhausted fear. The same fear she saw in the mirror some mornings. The fear of someone trying desperately to hold everything together while the world pulled it apart. The door opened. The bell chimed. He stepped inside and stood there, waiting, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there, like he was preparing for rejection. Maya straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, forcing her expression to remain neutral and professional. "Welcome to Maya's kitchen," she said evenly, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd been in customer service her entire life. "Today's special is jerk chicken with rice and peas. We also have oxtail stew, collard greens, mac and cheese, and fresh cornbread straight from the oven. What can I get started for you?" He looked at her for a moment longer than expected, like he was trying to determine if the welcome was genuine or performative. Then his shoulders dropped slightly, and some of the tension left his face. He walked toward the counter, movements careful, deliberate, like he was trying not to take up too much space. "Just, whatever's good," he said. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic, nothing like the aggressive tone she'd imagined. "I'm not picky. I just need something real, you know. Not fast food. Something that actually tastes like someone cared." Maya nodded and poured him a glass of water from the pitcher she kept cold in the small refrigerator under the counter. As she set it down, she noticed his hands. They were shaking. Not from cold. The restaurant was warm, almost uncomfortably so since the air conditioning had stopped working properly 2 weeks ago. From exhaustion, or stress, or both. His knuckles were scarred, small white lines across the dark skin. The tattoos continued onto his hands, disappearing beneath the cuffs of his sleeves. "You okay?" she asked, not as a business owner trying to upsell, but as a person recognizing something familiar in another person's struggle. He looked up quickly, surprised by the question. People in this neighborhood didn't usually ask, didn't usually care. You kept your head down, minded your business, survived. Yeah, I'm good. Just long day." His laugh was weak, unconvincing. Maya studied him for a moment, reading the exhaustion in his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders. "You sure? Because you look like you've been running on empty for a while." He let out a longer breath, and for a second she thought he might actually open up. But then he caught himself, straightened slightly. Something like that. Maya didn't push. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and started plating the jerk chicken. She moved efficiently, muscle memory taking over. A generous portion of chicken, the skin crispy and glazed with her grandmother's special sauce. A scoop of rice and peas, the kidney beans plump and perfectly seasoned. A side of sautéed plantains, caramelized just right. 2 pieces of cornbread, still warm, with butter melting on top. She added a small side of coleslaw she hadn't mentioned, crisp and tangy. As she worked, she glanced back through the pass-through window. He was sitting at the counter now, staring down at the water glass like it held answers he was desperately searching for. His right leg bounced nervously under the stool. His fingers drummed against the counter in an irregular rhythm. When she brought the plate out, she set it in front of him gently, the ceramic making a soft sound against the countertop. "Fresh made this morning," she said. "The chicken's got some heat to it, but not too much. And the cornbread, that's my grandmother's recipe. Been in our family for 3 generations. He looked at the food, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close, like he was seeing something he'd almost forgotten existed. "How much?" $12. He reached for his wallet, pulling it from his back pocket, and that's when Maya noticed something else. A hospital bracelet on his wrist. Faded, the writing smudged, but still there. White plastic against brown skin. The kind they give you in the emergency room. The kind most people cut off as soon as they're discharged. But he hadn't. He'd kept it on. "You get hurt?" she asked carefully, trying not to pry but unable to ignore what she'd seen. He pulled his sleeve down quickly, covering the bracelet. "Nah, just my mom. She's in the hospital. Elkridge General. Been there a while." His voice cracked slightly on the word mom. Maya felt the words land in her chest, heavy and familiar. She'd spent enough time in hospitals to know what "been there a while" meant. It meant serious. It meant expensive. It meant the kind of worry that follows you everywhere, even into sleep, especially into sleep. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, her expression softening, then walked back behind the counter, giving him space to eat, space to breathe, space to exist without being questioned or judged. He ate slowly, like every bite took effort, like he hadn't eaten in days, like the food was more than nutrition. It was a brief moment of normalcy in a life that had stopped feeling normal. Maya busied herself with wiping down the coffee station, refilling the sugar packets, straightening the menus in their holder. But every so often, she glanced over, and each time, she saw the same thing. A young man trying to hold himself together, trying not to break, trying to be strong even though strong was the last thing he felt. When he finished, he pushed the plate forward carefully, making sure it didn't scrape against the counter. He pulled out a crumpled $20 bill from his wallet, smoothing it flat before placing it on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, standing up slowly. Maya picked up the 20 and immediately slid $8 back toward him. "You need it more than I do." He hesitated, his hand hovering over the money. "I can pay." "I know you can," Maya said, "but today you don't have to." He stared at her like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly, like kindness was a language he'd almost forgotten. Then he nodded slowly and picked up the bills, folding them carefully before returning them to his wallet. "Thank you." His voice was barely above a whisper. As he turned to leave, Maya called out, "What's your name?" He paused at the door, hand on the handle, looked back over his shoulder. "Diego. Diego," she repeated, letting the name settle. "You're welcome here any time. And I mean that." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers for insincerity, for the catch, for the reason behind the kindness. But he didn't find any. He just found a woman who'd looked at him and seen a person. Not a threat, not a stereotype, not a headline. A person. He nodded once, something that might have been the beginning of a smile touching the corners of his mouth, and walked out. The bell chimed softly behind him. Maya stood there for a long moment, watching through the window as he got into his car. The engine roared to life, that same deep, powerful sound, but he didn't peel out, didn't rev the engine unnecessarily. He pulled away slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to draw attention, like he was trying to be invisible in a car designed to be seen. As the sound faded into the distance, Maya turned back to the empty restaurant. She picked up his plate, noticing he'd eaten everything. Even the coleslaw she hadn't charged him for. Even the second piece of cornbread she'd snuck onto the plate. Something about that interaction sat heavy in her chest. Not fear, something else. Recognition. She'd seen that look before. In her brother's eyes after the shooting, when he'd realized his life had changed forever and there was nothing he could do about it. In her own reflection some mornings when the bills piled higher than the hope. The look of someone just trying to survive, just trying to make it through one more day without falling apart. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she knew Diego's story wasn't over. Not yet. She had a feeling he'd be back, and she had a feeling that when he did come back, something would be different. She just didn't know what. Not yet. The afternoon sun beat down on Patterson Avenue 3 days later, turning the asphalt into a shimmering haze that made the street look like it was melting. Inside Maya's kitchen, the air conditioner continued its death rattle, doing more to create noise than actual cooling. Sweat beaded on Maya's forehead as she worked behind the grill, flipping chicken breasts and stirring a pot of collard greens that had been simmering since 5 that morning. The lunch rush hadn't come. It never did anymore. But she cooked anyway, because that's what her grandmother would have done. She stood behind the counter, folding napkins into perfect triangles, more out of habit than necessity. The radio played softly in the background, a soulful melody that her grandmother used to sway to while cooking. Maya hummed along under her breath, letting the rhythm fill the silence. She'd learned long ago that silence could be deafening if you let it, so she filled it with music, with movement, with the small rituals that kept her grounded. Then the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, expecting Mrs. Patterson or maybe one of the delivery drivers dropping off supplies she could barely afford. Instead, Diego walked in. Same black hoodie, same nervous energy radiating from him like heat. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, moving slowly with the help of a wooden cane, was a woman in her mid-50s. Her hair was wrapped in a colorful scarf, geometric patterns in red, gold, and green. Her face was lined with exhaustion, the kind that comes from illness, from treatment, from fighting battles most people never see. She wore a faded hospital gown under a thin denim jacket that hung loose on her diminished frame, and her steps were careful, deliberate, like each one required concentration. Like walking had become something she could no longer take for granted. Diego held her elbow gently, guiding her toward a booth near the window. "Careful, Ma," he said softly, his voice tender in a way that made Maya's chest ache. "Just a few more steps. You got this." The woman nodded, her breath coming in short bursts, and lowered herself into the seat with a quiet groan of relief. Diego slid in across from her, his eyes immediately scanning the restaurant like he was checking for threats, for judgment, for any sign they weren't welcome. Then his gaze found Maya. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod, uncertain, almost apologetic for taking up space. Maya walked over, wiping her hands on her apron, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "Welcome back," she said warmly, then turned to the woman. "Ma'am, it's so good to have you here. I'm Maya. This is my grandmother's place." The woman looked up, her eyes tired but kind. There was warmth there, despite everything. "Thank you, baby. Diego hasn't stopped talking about this place, about you. Said you treated him like a person." Her voice was hoarse, strained, like speaking took effort. "Said that doesn't happen much anymore." Maya felt the words settle over her like a weight. "That's because he is a person, and you're both welcome here any time." She pulled out her order pad, though she already knew what she was going to make. "What can I get started for you? We have fresh chicken soup today. My grandmother used to make it whenever someone in the family was sick. Said it had healing powers. I don't know about that, but it's good for the soul at least." The woman smiled faintly, and for a moment, some of the exhaustion left her face. "That sounds perfect, baby. Thank you." Maya turned to Diego. "Same as last time?" He nodded, his throat working like he was swallowing words he couldn't say. "Yeah, thank you." As Maya walked back to the kitchen, she heard the woman speak quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the dying air conditioner. "You were right. This place feels safe." Diego didn't respond, but Maya saw him nod through the pass-through window, his eyes fixed on the table, jaw clenched tight. Safe. When was the last time someone had called this place safe? When was the last time anywhere in this neighborhood felt safe? Maya worked quickly, ladling her grandmother's chicken soup into a large bowl, the broth golden and rich with vegetables and chunks of tender chicken. She added extra chicken, extra carrots, knowing the woman needed nutrients more than she needed portion control. She plated the jerk chicken for Diego, making sure to add extra rice because she'd noticed how thin he was, how his clothes hung a bit too loose. She warmed fresh cornbread in the oven, brushing the tops with butter mixed with honey. She brought the food out, setting it down gently in front of them, arranging everything so the woman could reach easily without straining. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said. "Extra napkins, water, anything at all." The woman reached out and touched Maya's hand lightly. her grip weak but deliberate. "Thank you, baby. You don't know how much this means. We've been to 3 places today. 2 wouldn't let us in. Just locked the door when they saw us walking up. The 3rd, the owner said they were closing early, at 11 in the morning." Maya's hand tightened under hers. "I'm sorry. That's not right." "No, it's not," the woman agreed. "But that's the world we live in. You see the jacket, you see the car, and you decide you know everything about who we are. You decide we're not worth your time, not worth basic human decency." Her voice cracked. "My boy works 2 jobs to pay for my treatment. 2 jobs and still comes to the hospital every single day. Never misses. He's not a criminal. He's not dangerous. He's just a son trying to save his mother." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to say something profound, something healing, but words felt inadequate. So she just squeezed the woman's hand gently and nodded. "You're safe here, both of you, always." She walked back behind the counter, giving them privacy to eat, but her mind churned with anger, with frustration, with the familiar sting of being judged before being known. She'd experienced it her entire life. The assumptions, the lowered expectations, the subtle ways people let you know you don't quite belong. For the next 20 minutes, she watched them eat. Diego cut his mother's cornbread into small pieces so she could manage it easier, arranging them on the edge of her bowl. The woman smiled at him between bites, her hand shaking slightly as she lifted the spoon, and sometimes she'd reach across the table to touch his cheek, like he was still her little boy. It was a quiet, tender moment, the kind that didn't need words, the kind that reminded Maya why she kept showing up every day. Because these moments mattered, these small acts of humanity in a world that increasingly felt inhuman. Then the door swung open, hard. The bell didn't chime. It clanged violently, the sound sharp and wrong. Maya's head snapped up, her heart already starting to race. 2 police officers stepped inside. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw that looked carved from stone and a military-style buzz cut showing gray at the temples. His uniform was crisp, the badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, gun at his hip like a third fist. His name tag read Officer Brennan in block letters. The second was shorter, stockier, with dark sunglasses that he didn't take off even inside. His arms were crossed over his chest, his stance wide and aggressive. His tag read, Officer Cruz. They scanned the room quickly, efficiently, eyes trained to assess and categorize. Their gaze landed on Diego, and something shifted in Brennan's expression. Recognition, satisfaction, the look of a hunter who'd just found his prey. He walked toward the booth, each boot strike deliberate and heavy against the tile floor, the sound echoing through the small space. "Well, well," Brennan said loudly, his voice cutting through the room like broken glass, intentionally disruptive. "Diego Morales, fancy seeing you here. Thought you'd be out tearing up the streets. Or maybe stealing another car. Isn't that what you Apex boys do?" Diego looked up slowly, his jaw tightening, his hands balling into fists under the table, but he kept his voice level, controlled. "I'm just having lunch, officer. We're not causing any trouble." Brennan stopped at the edge of the booth, looking down at them with barely concealed contempt. "Lunch? Right. Because law-abiding citizens definitely need to eat. Funny thing, though. I always heard your kind preferred fast food. Drive-thrus. Places where you don't have to sit still too long. Guess even criminals like to slow down sometimes." Diego's mother set down her spoon carefully, her hand trembling more now. "Officer, please. We're just trying to have a meal. We're not bothering anyone." Brennan ignored her completely, his focus entirely on Diego. "You know how many complaints we've gotten about the Apex crew in the past month? 17. 17 noise complaints, street racing, reckless endangerment, destruction of property. You're lucky we haven't shut you all down and seized every single one of those modified death traps you call cars." "That wasn't me," Diego said flatly, his voice tight but controlled. "I work 2 jobs. I don't have time for street racing." "Sure you don't," Cruz chimed in from behind, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They all say that, right before we find them wrapped around a telephone pole, or fleeing a crash scene. Brennan leaned down, resting one hand heavily on the table, his face close to Diego's. You match the description of a driver involved in a hit-and-run last week. Silver Skyline, blue, custom body kit, cherry bomb exhaust. Rings a bell? That wasn't me, Diego repeated, his voice hardening. I wasn't even in the city last week. I was at the hospital with my mother. He gestured to the woman across from him. She's undergoing chemotherapy. I've been there every single day. You can check the visitor logs if you want. Oh, I'm sure you got all kinds of alibis worked out, Brennan said dismissively. You people always do. But here's the thing. I don't need proof to bring you in for questioning. I just need reasonable suspicion. And right now, sitting here in that jacket, driving that car, you're looking pretty suspicious to me. Diego's mother grabbed his wrist across the table, her grip weak but desperate. Please, just show them your ID. Let's not make this worse. Listen to your mother, kid, Brennan said mockingly. At least someone in your family has some sense. Diego pulled his wallet out slowly, deliberately, his hands shaking now, not from fear, but from suppressed rage. He slid his license across the table. Brennan picked it up, studied it for a beat too long, like he was disappointed it didn't give him a reason to escalate, then tossed it back carelessly. It landed in Diego's soup bowl with a splash, broth splattering across the table and onto Diego's shirt. Oops, Brennan said with a cold smirk. My bad. That's when Maya moved. She came out from behind the counter fast, her apron swinging, her face set in an expression that was equal parts anger and determination. He's a customer, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Brennan turned slowly, eyebrows raised in theatrical surprise. Excuse me? He's a paying customer, Maya repeated, stepping closer, refusing to be intimidated despite the significant size difference. And unless you have a warrant, you need to leave him alone. Brennan's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance to something darker. Disrespect. This doesn't concern you, ma'am. This is police business. It concerns me when it's happening in my restaurant, Maya shot back, her voice steady but firm, every word deliberate. You came in here looking for trouble. You've been harassing a man and his sick mother, who are just trying to eat a meal in peace. That makes it my business. Cruz stepped forward, his hand dropping to rest on his belt near his weapon. Lady, you don't know who you're dealing with. This kid's part of a criminal organization. The Apex crew has been linked to dozens of illegal activities. Criminal organization? Maya's voice rose slightly, laced with sharp sarcasm. You mean a group of people who like cars? Last I checked, that's not illegal. Having a hobby isn't illegal. Modifying your own property isn't illegal. And eating lunch definitely isn't illegal. Street racing is, Brennan said, his voice hardening. Reckless driving is. Evading police is. Destruction of property is. We have videos of Apex crew members doing all of that. And do you have proof that Diego specifically did any of those things? Maya challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you came in here with assumptions, not evidence. You saw the jacket and the car and decided you knew everything about who he is. That's called profiling, officer. And last I checked, that's not legal either. Brennan's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He took a step toward her, invading her personal space in a clear attempt at intimidation. You really want to do this? You really want to interfere with police business? Because I can make your life very difficult, miss. He glanced at the name embroidered on her apron. Rodriguez. Maya didn't back down. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not interfering with anything. I'm protecting my customer from harassment. There's a difference. If you want to arrest him, show me a warrant. If you want to question him about a crime, take him to the station and let him call a lawyer. But right now, in my restaurant, while he's sitting here with his mother eating soup, he's under my protection, and you will treat him with the same respect you'd give anyone else. The room went completely silent. Even the hum of the failing air conditioner seemed to quiet. Diego stared at Maya, his eyes wide with shock, with disbelief, with something that might have been hope. His mother's hand covered her mouth. tears starting to stream down her face. Mrs. Patterson, still sitting at her booth by the window with her old newspaper, had set it down and was watching intently, her expression unreadable. Brennan's face reddened, anger and embarrassment warring for dominance. His hand moved toward his belt, and for one terrible moment, Maya thought he might actually reach for his weapon. But he stopped, his fingers just brushing the radio clipped there. "You're making a serious mistake," he said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. "A serious mistake. This town has a long memory, and we take care of our own. People who side with criminals, who protect gang members, they don't last long here." "Then I guess I won't last long," Maya replied, her voice equally quiet but completely steady. "But I'd rather make a mistake standing up for what's right than spend the rest of my life looking away when someone needs help." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was so thick, Maya could feel it pressing against her skin. Then Brennan turned sharply, motioning to Cruz with a jerk of his head. "Let's go. We'll catch him on the street, where there aren't any bleeding heart defenders around." They walked toward the door, boots echoing with each deliberate step. Before stepping out, Brennan looked back one more time, his gaze locking with Maya's. "You just made an enemy, lady. I hope your little act of charity was worth it. Because tomorrow, when the word gets out about what you did, when people start talking, when your business dries up and blows away, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you chose this." Maya folded her arms across her chest, refusing to show the fear that was starting to creep up her spine. "I've had worse enemies, and I'll remember this moment just fine. I'll remember that I did the right thing. That's enough for me." The door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the frame. The bell clanged violently one last time, then swung in diminishing arcs, each chime softer than the last, until finally stopping. Silence returned, but it was different now. Heavy, charged, dangerous. Diego stood slowly, his legs shaking, his hands trembling so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice breaking, thick with emotion. "You didn't have to. You don't even know me. You don't know what this is going to cost you." Maya looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the fear and gratitude and confusion all tangled together in his expression. "Yes, I did have to. Because what they were doing, that wasn't right. That wasn't justice. That was bullying. That was using power to make someone feel small. And I'm not going to stand in my grandmother's restaurant and watch that happen without saying something." His mother stood too, and before Maya could step back, the woman pulled her into a tight hug, her thin arms surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Nobody stands up anymore. Nobody risks anything for people like us. But you did. You don't know what that means. You don't know what it means to be seen, to be treated like you matter." Maya hugged her back, her eyes closing, feeling the woman's ribs through her thin jacket, feeling the fragility of a body being ravaged by disease and treatment. "You do matter. You both do. And I'm sorry the world has made you feel like you don't." They stood there for a long moment, two women holding each other in the middle of an empty restaurant, bound together by circumstance and choice, and the simple, radical act of human decency. When they finally pulled apart, Diego reached into his wallet. "Let me pay, please. It's the least I can do." Maya shook her head. "Your money's no good here today. You just take care of your mother. That's payment enough." He stared at her, and she saw the moment something broke inside him. His face crumpled, and tears started streaming down his cheeks. He turned away quickly, embarrassed, but his mother grabbed his hand and held it tight. "It's okay, baby," she said softly. "It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel this." They left a few minutes later, Diego supporting his mother as they walked slowly to his car. Maya watched through the window as he helped her into the passenger seat, carefully adjusting the seatbelt, making sure she was comfortable before closing the door gently. He looked back at the restaurant one more time, his expression unreadable, then got in and drove away. The car pulled out slowly, carefully, the engine's rumble fading into the afternoon heat. Maya stood by the register, her heart still racing, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. Mrs. Patterson stood up from her booth and walked over, her movements slow and deliberate. She placed a $5 bill on the counter, more than her coffee and grits cost. "That was a brave thing you did," she said quietly. Maya shook her head. "It wasn't brave. It was just necessary." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Mrs. Patterson replied. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and squeezed Maya's hand. "Your grandmother would be proud." And then she left, the bell chiming softly behind her. Maya locked the door after her and turned the sign to closed even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. She needed a moment, just a moment to breathe, to process, to understand what she'd just done and what it might cost her. She walked to the corner booth, her grandmother's booth, and sat down. Her whole body felt heavy, like gravity had suddenly increased. She put her head in her hands and let herself shake. She'd stood up to the police. She'd defended someone the whole neighborhood considered trouble. She'd made herself a target, and tomorrow everyone would know. The word would spread. The consequences would begin. But as she sat there in the quiet restaurant, surrounded by her grandmother's memories and her own uncertain future, she realized something. She didn't regret it. Not even a little. Because some things are worth more than safety. Some things are worth more than business. Some things are worth everything. Like dignity. Like humanity. Like looking someone in the eye and saying, "You matter," even when the whole world says they don't. The next morning, Maya woke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand, vibrating so hard it was walking itself toward the edge. She blinked at the ceiling, disoriented, her body heavy with the kind of sleep that comes after emotional exhaustion. She reached over and grabbed the phone before it could fall. 12 missed calls, 15 text messages, all from numbers she didn't recognize. Her stomach clenched into a tight knot. She scrolled through the messages with growing dread. Most were short, vague, almost threatening in their ambiguity. "Saw what you did yesterday. Hope it was worth it. You're going to regret standing up for those thugs. Race lovers aren't welcome here. Should have minded your business." One message was different. It was from Mrs. Patterson, sent at 5:30 in the morning. "Don't open today, please. Trust me. I'll explain later." Maya sat up slowly, her heart starting to pound. She walked to the window of her small apartment and pulled back the curtain. The street below was still dark, the first hints of dawn just starting to creep over the buildings like a hesitant promise. But something felt wrong. The air felt charged. She could sense it even from here. She got dressed quickly, skipping breakfast despite her stomach growling, pulled her locks back into a messy bun, and grabbed her keys. The drive to the restaurant felt longer than usual. Every red light seemed deliberately slow. Every empty street seemed ominous. As she turned onto Patterson Avenue, her breath caught in her throat. The front window of Maya's kitchen was covered, not with boards or protective shutters, with spray paint, thick, angry letters in red and black, dripping in places where someone had used too much paint. The words hit her like physical blows. "Race lover, thug defender, traitor, go back!" And worse, words she hadn't seen since high school. Words that made her grandmother cry, words that were meant to dehumanize, to reduce, to destroy. Maya sat in her car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, too hot, pressing down on her chest like a weight. She wanted to drive away. She wanted to pretend she hadn't seen it. She wanted to go back to yesterday morning when the worst thing she had to worry about was paying rent. But she couldn't. This was her grandmother's restaurant. This was her responsibility. This was her choice. She got out of the car slowly, legs shaky, and approached the door. The graffiti was worse up close. Some of it was fresh, the paint still slightly tacky. Some of it had been done in layers, multiple people adding their hatred one coat at a time. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Rotting food, but not the clean smell of kitchen waste. Something fouler, more deliberate. She looked down. Someone had shoved garbage through the mail slot during the night. Banana peels black with decay, chicken bones, soiled napkin, and something worse she didn't want to identify. Something that had attracted flies that now buzzed lazily in the early morning heat. Her chest tightened, but she kept moving. She couldn't afford to break down. Not yet. She grabbed a trash bag from behind the counter and started cleaning, one piece at a time, slowly, methodically. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. When the world gets ugly, baby, you stay clean. You stay dignified. You don't let them pull you down to their level. By 7 a.m., the inside was clean. But the outside, the window, she couldn't fix that. Not yet. She needed paint remover. She needed time. She needed help she didn't have. She sat down at the counter, poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot she'd brewed on autopilot, and stared at the phone. No customers would come today. She knew that with absolute certainty. The question was whether they'd ever come back. Whether her defense of Diego would mark the end of everything her grandmother had built. Whether standing up had been worth destroying herself. At 8 a.m., she heard a knock. She looked up, her body tensing automatically. A man stood outside holding a professional camera with a large lens. A reporter. She recognized the logo on his microphone. Channel 7 News. She didn't open the door. He knocked again, louder this time, more insistent. Miss Rodriguez, I just want to ask you a few questions about yesterday's incident. The confrontation with police, the defense of the Apex crew member, just a few minutes of your time. Maya pulled the curtain closed and stepped back into the shadows. He knocked a third time, then she heard him speaking to someone else outside. More voices, more cameras. By 10 a.m., 3 more news vans had arrived. One crew tried the back entrance, jiggling the handle aggressively. Maya locked it and turned off all the lights. She sat in the dark, in the corner booth her grandmother had always reserved for family, and tried not to let the walls close in around her. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother, Marcus. I saw the news. Maya, what did you do? They're saying you defended a gang member. They're saying you interfered with police. Are you okay? Please tell me you're okay. She typed back slowly, her fingers heavy. I'm fine. Don't worry, it's being blown out of proportion. But she wasn't fine. She was terrified. Not of the police, not of the reporters, of the silence that would follow, of the empty restaurant that would become her new permanent reality, of the slow, quiet way a dream dies when the community decides you're not worth saving. At noon, the phone on the wall rang, the old landline her grandmother had installed in 1987 and refused to disconnect even after cell phones became ubiquitous. Maya stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Maya's kitchen. Miss Rodriguez? A man's voice said, professional, cold. This is Tom Bradley from Westside Property Management. We need to discuss your lease agreement. Her stomach dropped into her feet. What about it? We've received several complaints about the incident with law enforcement yesterday, about the vandalism this morning, about the type of clientele you're attracting. We're concerned about the property value and the reputation of the building. I'm cleaning the vandalism, Maya said quickly, fighting to keep her voice steady. It'll be gone by tomorrow. I just need to get the right supplies. That's not really the point, Miss Rodriguez. The point is that your business is attracting negative attention. The wrong kind of attention. And that affects the other tenants in the area. It affects property values. It affects our ability to lease other units. We have a responsibility to maintain certain standards. Maya's hand tightened around the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Standards? I stood up for a customer who was being harassed. That's it. That's all I did. I didn't break any laws. I didn't do anything wrong. You interfered with police officers conducting an investigation, Bradley said. That customer you defended is part of a street racing gang that's been linked to numerous illegal activities. By defending him, by allowing them to use your establishment, you've associated your business, and by extension our property, with criminal elements. Criminal elements? Maya's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. He's a young man working 2 jobs to pay for his mother's chemotherapy. He came in to eat lunch. That's not criminal. That's human. That's what every single person deserves the right to do without being harassed. I understand your perspective, Miss Rodriguez, but from a business standpoint, this is a liability we can't accept. The terms of your lease include a clause about maintaining the property's reputation and not engaging in activities that could negatively impact surrounding businesses. I run a restaurant, Maya said, her voice breaking slightly. I serve food. I don't ask people for their life story before I seat them. I don't run background checks before I pour coffee. I treat everyone who walks through that door with respect. That's what my grandmother did for 40 years, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Bradley sighed, and she could hear the resignation in his voice. I'm sorry, Miss Rodriguez. I really am. But we're going to have to terminate your lease. You have until the end of the month to vacate the premises. The end of the month? Maya repeated, her voice hollow. That's 3 weeks. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. It's not personal. It's business. It's always business, Maya whispered. Until it's your business. Until it's your family. Until it's your life. The line went dead. Maya stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone for a long moment before finally hanging up. The end of the month. 3 weeks. 21 days to pack up 40 years of history. 21 days to figure out what to do with her grandmother's legacy. 21 days before everything ended. She sat down slowly in the nearest booth, her legs giving out beneath her. She looked around the restaurant with new eyes. The faded photos on the walls, documenting decades of community, of celebration, of life. The worn booths where countless families had shared meals and stories. The counter where her grandmother used to stand, singing while she cooked, her voice carrying joy into every corner. It was all slipping away, not because she'd done something wrong, but because she'd done something right, and somehow, inexplicably, that was worse. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, started making a list, not of bills this time, of memories, things she needed to remember, things she couldn't let fade. The way Grandma hummed while she cooked. The regular who always ordered his eggs scrambled with cheese, no peppers. The little girl who used to draw pictures on her napkins and leave them as tips. The couple who had their first date here and came back for their 50th anniversary. The community meetings held in the corner booth. The birthday parties. The post-funeral gatherings. The quiet mornings. The loud Friday nights. All of it. As she wrote, her pen stopped, and she thought about Diego, about his mother, about the way they'd looked at her with gratitude and hope and something that felt like being truly seen for the first time in a long time, and she realized something that settled over her like a warm blanket on a cold night. She didn't regret it. Even now, sitting in the ruins of her grandmother's dream, facing eviction and financial ruin and community ostracism, she didn't regret it, because defending them wasn't on her list of mistakes. It was on her list of things that mattered, of moments when she'd been the person her grandmother raised her to be. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. Because some battles you fight not because you can win, but because fighting is the right thing to do. Because losing with dignity is better than winning by looking away. That night, Maya sat alone in the restaurant long after closing. The lights off except for the glow from the kitchen. She was making plans. Not for how to save the business, she knew that was probably impossible now. Plans for what came next, where to store the photos, how to honor her grandmother's memory even without the physical space, how to survive losing everything you've worked for while somehow keeping your soul intact. She thought about Diego again, wondered if he knew what had happened, wondered if he felt responsible. Wondered if he was okay, and she hoped, despite everything, that he was, that his mother was responding to treatment, that he could keep working his 2 jobs, that life would be kinder to him than it had been lately, because that's what you do when you genuinely care about people. You hope for them. even when your own hope is running dangerously low. But as the hours stretched toward midnight, as exhaustion pulled at her bones and her coffee grew cold in the cup, Maya made herself a promise. However this ended, whatever happened next, she would not apologize. She would not regret. She would not wish she'd stayed silent, because the world had enough silence, enough people looking away, enough bystanders who prioritized comfort over courage. And maybe her grandmother's real legacy wasn't the restaurant. Maybe it was the lesson that some things are worth everything, that dignity matters, that humanity matters, that seeing people, really seeing them, is sometimes the most radical act of all. The morning of the fourth day after the incident, Maya woke before her alarm, pulled from sleep by dreams she couldn't quite remember, but that left her feeling anxious and unsettled. She hadn't slept well since the confrontation. Nightmares about eviction notices and empty restaurants and her grandmother's disappointed face had kept her tossing and turning, sheets tangled around her legs like they were trying to hold her down. But as the first light of dawn filtered through her bedroom window, painting everything in shades of gray and gold, she made a decision that settled something fundamental in her chest. She was going to open. She didn't care if no one came. She didn't care if reporters camped outside with their cameras and their invasive questions. She didn't care if the entire neighborhood had turned against her. She was going to show up because that's what her grandmother would have done. Because showing up, even when showing up feels impossible, is sometimes the only form of resistance available. It's a declaration that you refuse to disappear, that you refuse to be erased, that you're still here, still fighting, still believing that tomorrow might be different than today. She got dressed with deliberate care, pulling on her best jeans and a clean shirt, tying her locks back with her grandmother's favorite purple scarf. She put on the faded blue apron, running her fingers over the small burn marks and stains that told their own stories of years behind a stove. When she arrived at the restaurant just before 6 a.m., the graffiti was still there, stark and ugly in the early morning light, a vicious reminder of how quickly community can turn to cruelty. But she didn't let it stop her. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights one by one, each switch a small act of defiance, and started brewing coffee. The familiar routine was comforting. Measure the grounds. Add the water. Wait for the machine to gurgle and hiss as it brought water to temperature. The smell that filled the small space was rich and dark, a scent she'd known her entire life, a scent that meant home and safety and her grandmother's laugh. She moved to the kitchen and started prep work. Chopped onions for the collard greens, seasoned chicken for the day's special, mixed cornbread batter by hand the way her grandmother always insisted, claiming electric mixers couldn't capture the same love. By 8 a.m., everything was ready. The coffee was hot. The grill was at perfect temperature. The tables were wiped down until they gleamed. The menus were straightened in their holders. Fresh flowers she couldn't afford but bought anyway sat in a small vase on the counter. And Maya stood behind the register, apron tied, shoulders back, waiting for nothing, waiting for everything. Not a single customer came. 9 o'clock passed, then 10. The phone didn't ring. The door didn't open. Even Mrs. Patterson, her most loyal regular, stayed away. At 11, Maya sat at the front booth and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was happening. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with silence. Not with confrontation, but with absence. The slow suffocation of being forgotten, of being avoided, of being deemed unworthy of support. She thought about calling Marcus. But what would she say? That she'd destroyed their grandmother's legacy for a principle? That she'd chosen a stranger over survival? That she didn't regret it even though it cost them everything? She closed her eyes and let herself sit in that darkness for just a moment. Let herself feel the grief and the fear and the overwhelming loneliness of standing for something when everyone else sits down. And then she heard it. Faint at first, so quiet she thought she might be imagining it. A rumble, low and deep and distant, like thunder rolling across the horizon but constant, not fading, growing. Her eyes opened. She tilted her head, listening more intently. The sound grew louder, closer, more distinct. Not thunder. Engines. Multiple engines. Dozens of them. She stood slowly, her heart starting to race, and walked to the window. She looked out toward the end of Patterson Avenue, squinting against the late morning sun. And then she saw them. Cars. Emerging from side streets and main roads, like they'd been summoned from all corners of the city. Modified imports with lowered suspensions and aggressive body kits. Classic muscle cars with rumbling V8 engines that shook the ground. Sleek tuners with wide body modifications and massive spoilers. Vintage rides restored to perfect condition. Each one unique, each one clearly loved and meticulously maintained. They turned onto Patterson Avenue one by one, creating a procession that seemed endless. 30 cars, then 50, then more. They lined both sides of the street, parking in every available space, double parking when necessary, pulling onto sidewalks, filling the avenue with chrome and color and barely contained power. The sound was overwhelming. A symphony of horsepower, of exhaust notes ranging from high-pitched screams to bass-heavy thunder, of engines tuned to perfection by people who understood machines the way musicians understand instruments. Maya's hand flew to her mouth, her other hand gripping the window frame to keep herself steady. The drivers started getting out, and that's when she realized the true scale of what was happening. Young men and women, some barely out of high school, others in their 30s and 40s, all wearing different crew jackets with unique patches and designs. Apex Crew, Velocity Kings with a crown logo, Midnight Runners with a moon emblem, Street Legends in bold Gothic lettering, Turbo Union, Nitro Nation, East Side Racers. Names she'd heard whispered in community meetings, always with fear, always with contempt, as if these people were a plague rather than human beings with a passion. Some wore hoodies despite the heat. Some wore racing gloves with reinforced palms. Some had goggles pushed up on their foreheads. But all of them, every single one, looked toward the restaurant with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. Not anger, not judgment. Something else. Solidarity, recognition. The look of people who understood what it meant to be judged before being known, to be feared before being met, to be condemned for existing in a way that made others uncomfortable. Then Diego stepped out of his midnight blue skyline, and beside him emerged a woman Maya hadn't seen before. She was in her early 30s, with short black hair styled in an undercut, the longer top portion swept to one side. She wore a leather jacket despite the heat, black with silver hardware, and the jacket was covered in patches. Not random decorations, but carefully placed badges that told a story of races won, crews respected, miles driven. Across the back, in bold silver embroidery that caught the sunlight, were the words, Apex Crew, Founder. Below it, a single name, Carmen. Diego and Carmen approached the door together, their footsteps synchronized, their expressions serious. Maya's hands shook as she unlocked it, the key rattling against the lock before finally catching. She pulled the door open, and for a moment they all just looked at each other. "Miss Rodriguez," Diego said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to meet someone. This is Carmen Rivera. She founded the Apex Crew 10 years ago." Carmen extended her hand, and Maya shook it, finding the grip firm and confident. "Diego told me what you did," Carmen said, her voice strong and clear, the kind of voice accustomed to being heard over engine noise and crowd chaos. "He told me you stood up for him when no one else would, that you put yourself on the line for someone you didn't even know, for someone wearing a jacket that scares most people, for someone the world had already decided was guilty." Maya swallowed hard, unsure what to say. I couldn't let them treat him like that." "I know," Carmen said, and something in her eyes softened. "That's exactly why we're here. All of us." Maya looked past them, through the door, at the street now packed with vehicles and people. "How many?" she whispered, the question barely audible. Carmen smiled, and it transformed her entire face, turning serious intensity into genuine warmth. 339. Every crew in the Tri-City area, some from even further. We started making calls yesterday, posted on every forum, every social media page, every group chat. Told them what happened, what you did, what you're facing, because you treated one of ours like a human being. And they all came. Maya's eyes filled with tears, her vision blurring. Why? Diego stepped forward, his own eyes wet. Because you saw me, not the jacket, not the stereotype, not the headlines about street racing and reckless youth. You saw me as a person. You saw my mother as a person. And when those cops came in to dehumanize us, to make us small, you stood up. You risked everything. Nobody does that for us. Nobody. Carmen nodded, her expression grave. In our world, loyalty is everything. Family is everything. And what you showed Diego and his mother, that was family. That was loyalty to the most important thing, human dignity. So now we're returning it. We're showing you that you're not alone, that standing up matters, that we see you the same way you saw Diego. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the kind banks use for large amounts of cash. This is from all the crews, combined. Every single person out there contributed to help cover your costs. Rent, repairs, whatever you need. We heard about the eviction notice, about the vandalism, about the community turning their backs. So we're turning toward you instead. Maya took the envelope with shaking hands, barely able to process what was happening. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were dozens of folded bills in various denominations, personal checks with memo lines that read things like, "For standing up," and "Thank you for seeing us," and money orders made out to Maya's kitchen. There was also a handwritten note on lined paper, the handwriting different in each line, clearly passed around for multiple people to sign. For the woman who stands when others sit, from the people who race forward when others tell us to stop. You defended one of ours. Now you're one of ours, protected, respected, family. The paper was covered in signatures, some neat, some messy, some just first names, others full names with crew affiliations listed underneath. Maya's legs felt weak. She sat down hard in the nearest booth, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in gasps. "I don't know what to say. I can't." "You don't have to say anything," Carmen said gently, sitting down across from her. "Just let us eat. Let us support you the same way you supported Diego. That's how this works. That's how community actually works." And with that simple statement, the floodgates opened. Drivers filed into the restaurant one by one, respectfully, quietly, filling every booth, every seat at the counter, every inch of available space. Those who couldn't fit inside sat on the hoods of their cars, on the curb, on the sidewalk, waiting patiently for their turn. Orders came fast and constant, overwhelming. "Jerk chicken, please. What's the special? 2 orders of collard greens. Is that cornbread fresh? Can I get the oxtail stew?" Maya moved in a daze, her hands working on autopilot, filling plates, pouring drinks, taking money, making change, barely keeping up with the sudden rush. But she wasn't alone. Diego had stepped behind the counter without asking, tying on a spare apron he found hanging in the back, his movements efficient as he helped plate food and organize orders. Carmen was buzzing tables, clearing dishes, refilling water glasses, moving through the crowd with the easy authority of someone used to managing chaos. Other drivers pitched in without being asked. A young woman with purple hair started washing dishes, her hands moving quickly through the soap and water. A man with a full sleeve of automotive tattoos took orders, writing them down on spare receipt paper. Someone else started sweeping between the booths, keeping the floor clean despite the constant traffic. The restaurant, once silent and empty and dying, was now bursting with life. Laughter echoed off the walls, genuine and warm. Conversations overlapped in a pleasant chaos of voices sharing stories, discussing modifications, planning future meets, just existing together in community. The smell of soul food filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of motor oil and gasoline and tire rubber from the street, creating something entirely new. Something that felt like hope. Mrs. Patterson appeared at some point, standing in the doorway, her mouth hanging open in shock. She looked at Maya, then at the crowd, filling every inch of space, then back at Maya. "I told you not to open today," she said, but there was no reproach in her voice. Only wonder. Maya smiled through her tears, her face probably a mess of running makeup and joy and exhaustion. "I had to. I couldn't let them win." Mrs. Patterson walked inside slowly, her elderly steps careful, taking it all in with eyes that had seen decades of this neighborhood's changes. Then she sat down at her usual spot by the window, folded her old newspaper without reading it, and just watched. Watched as the community she thought she knew revealed itself to be something different, something more complex, something that challenged every assumption she'd made. By noon, the line of cars stretched 3 blocks in each direction. By 1 p.m., local news vans had arrived, their satellite dishes extended, cameras rolling, reporters speaking rapidly into microphones while gesturing at the extraordinary scene. But this time, Maya didn't hide. She stood in the doorway, apron stained with sauce and sweat, face exhausted, but absolutely glowing with something that felt like vindication, like joy, like the beginning of healing. She watched as the neighborhood she thought had abandoned her slowly came back to life in ways she'd never expected. People from the community started showing up, not drivers, just neighbors, drawn by the noise, by the crowd, by curiosity about what could possibly be happening on Patterson Avenue. Joe Martinez, the owner of the now-closed auto body shop, came by. He'd been shuttered for over a year, but he stood outside, arms crossed over his chest, nodding slowly as he examined the modifications on the cars with an expert's eye. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered to no one in particular, but loud enough that several drivers heard and smiled. "Quality work, though. Real quality. Whoever did that turbo install knows what they're doing." A group of children gathered on the corner, eyes wide with wonder, asking the drivers breathless questions. "How fast can it go? What's that thing on the hood? Can I sit inside? Does it really shoot flames?" The drivers, patient and clearly delighted, let them look, opened hoods to show modified engines, explained the mechanics in simple terms, lifted children into driver's seats so they could pretend to race while making engine noises with their mouths. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. The fear that had defined how the neighborhood viewed these crews started to crack. Because it's hard to maintain fear when you see someone carefully explaining to a 7-year-old how a turbocharger works, their voice gentle and educational. It's hard to judge someone when they're paying for their meal, tipping generously, saying please and thank you, ma'am, with genuine respect. It's hard to see someone as dangerous when they're helping an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car, refusing any payment, just smiling and saying, "It's what we do." It's hard to demonize someone when you watch them laugh with genuine joy at a child's drawing of their car, promising to hang it on their garage wall. The afternoon stretched on, and Maya found herself at the register, ringing up orders until her hands cramped, when Carmen approached again. "There's something else," Carmen said, pulling Maya aside to a quieter corner near the kitchen entrance. Maya looked up, exhausted but curious. Carmen pulled out a patch from her jacket pocket. It was circular, about 4 inches in diameter, embroidered with intricate detail. In the center was an image of a steaming plate of food, the steam stylized to look like tire smoke curling upward. Around the edge, in bold lettering, it read, "Protected by the Street, Apex Crew." Below that, in smaller script, "Maya's Kitchen, Family." "We want to give this to you," Carmen said, holding it out. "It means you're under our protection, all of ours. Not just Apex, but every crew that showed up today. No one touches you. No one touches this place. Not without answering to 339 people who are very good at showing up when it matters." Maya stared at the patch, her throat so tight she could barely breathe. "I don't know if I can accept this. I didn't do what I did for protection. I didn't do it for reward." "We know," Diego said, appearing beside Carmen. "You did it because it was right, because it was human. That's exactly why you deserve this. Because you didn't ask for anything in return. You just saw someone who needed defending and you defended them. That's the kind of person this patch represents. That's the kind of person our community values." Carmen's expression was earnest, her eyes locked on Maya's. "Accept it, not as payment, as recognition, as a promise. You stood with us. Now we stand with you." Maya took the patch carefully, running her fingers over the embroidery, feeling the raised threads, the care that had gone into creating it. Then she walked to the wall behind the register, where the photo of her and her grandmother hung, both of them smiling in better times. She found a small nail, positioned the patch right beside the photo, and pinned it in place. It looked right there. It belonged, like it had always been meant to be there, waiting for the right moment to appear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for seeing me too." The room erupted in applause, hands clapping, boots stomping, someone whistling long and loud. Maya turned back to face the crowd, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, maybe years, she felt truly seen, truly valued, truly part of something bigger than herself. That evening, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting Patterson Avenue in shades of gold and orange and deep purple, the drivers began to leave. Engines roared to life one by one, a staggered symphony of departure. They drove away slowly, respectfully, honking in farewell, hands waving from windows, headlights flashing in a coordinated pattern that felt almost ceremonial. Maya stood outside watching them go, the protected patch visible on the wall behind her through the open door, the smell of soul food still lingering in the air. Diego was among the last to leave. He walked up to her, hands in his pockets, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "My mom wants to come back soon," he said. "She said this is the first place she's felt truly safe in years. The first place where she wasn't defined by her illness or her son's jacket, just seen as a person." Maya smiled, her eyes still wet from crying happy tears. "She's always welcome. You both are. Anytime." Diego nodded, then paused, like he was trying to find words for something too big for language. "You changed something today, Miss Rodriguez. Not just for me, for all of us. You showed people that we're human, that we matter, that standing up for someone even when it costs you, that's what real courage looks like. I won't forget that. None of us will." "You changed something for me, too," Maya replied honestly. "You reminded me why my grandmother built this place, why she stayed when everyone told her to leave, why she believed in community even when community failed her. It's not about the food. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. That's what matters." He got into his car, the engine purring to life with that familiar, powerful rumble. As he pulled away, Maya stood there, watching until his taillights disappeared around the corner. The street was quieter now, but it wasn't empty. It wasn't dead. It was alive with possibility, with hope, with the kind of community that forms not from proximity, but from choice, from the decision to show up when it matters, from the courage to stand when others sit. And as she turned back toward the restaurant, she saw them. People she hadn't seen in months, neighbors who'd been absent, walking up hesitantly, curiously, drawn by what they'd witnessed, by the news coverage that was already spreading across the city, by the simple human desire to be part of something that feels real. They came in small groups, families, individuals, elderly couples, young professionals, people she recognized and people she'd never seen before. They didn't say much at first, but they came in, they sat down, they ordered, they ate, they stayed. And for the first time in a long time, Maya's kitchen felt like what her grandmother had always intended it to be. Not just a place that serves food, but a place that feeds the soul, a place that reminds people of their humanity, a place that stands for something when the world demands you stand for nothing. That night, After everyone had finally gone and the restaurant was quiet again, Maya locked the door and turned off the lights. She walked to the photo of her grandmother and stood there in the darkness, lit only by the streetlights outside. "I hope I made you proud, Grandma," she whispered. "I hope I honored what you built, what you believed in." And in the silence, in the stillness, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Not disappointed, not angry, proud, so deeply proud. "You did good, baby. You did real good. Sometimes the right thing costs us everything, but you pay the price anyway. Because that's what it means to live with dignity. That's what it means to truly be free." Maya smiled through fresh tears and touched the patch on the wall. Protected by the street. Family. She'd found something she hadn't known she was looking for. A community built not on proximity or race or class, but on the simple, profound act of seeing each other as human, of standing up when it matters, of choosing courage over comfort. The story of Maya, Diego, and the 339 racers who showed up for her isn't just about cars or confrontation or even courage, though it contains all of those things. It's about recognition, about what happens when we choose to see people as individuals rather than categories, when we stand up for what's right even when it costs us everything, when we refuse to be bystanders to injustice, no matter how small that injustice might seem. Because dignity isn't something you demand from the world. It's something you give freely to others. And when you give it without conditions, without judgment, without hesitation, it comes back to you in ways you never expected, from places you never imagined, in forms that transform not just your life, but your understanding of what community can actually mean. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up for another person when everyone else turned away? Or maybe you've been that person yourself, taking a risk to do what's right even when it felt impossible? We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Your words matter here. Every voice adds to this conversation about courage and community. Every story reminds us that we're not alone in this struggle to be better, to do better, to see each other more clearly. And if stories like this resonate with you, if you believe in honoring human dignity and celebrating everyday courage, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that remind us what it means to stand together even when standing is the hardest thing in the world to do. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being the kind of person who chooses to see people rather than labels. Join our community by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that celebrates human dignity and the quiet courage of people who refuse to look away when someone needs defending.